My name's Conor Eddy. I'm a counsellor with People Before Profit, and I'm going to be chairing the press conference today. So I've actually just come from a protest at Trinity College this morning where we're very hopeful that the university, after years of campaigning by students and staff, will end its complicity in Israeli crimes and genocide. I think that protest matters, and it's particularly fitting that today we're here directly after it, because I think it shows that the campaign to defend Irish neutrality is not happening in a vacuum. I think it's happening in the context of growing militarisation in Europe and elsewhere around the world as we drift kind of ever closer to war, and it's also occurring against a backdrop of that genocide, some of those horrific crimes that we've seen in our lifetimes in Palestine. I think the question that's posed to everybody right now is what side are you on? So with the pamphlet that we're going to launch today, we set out where we stand as People Before Profit, and where we believe the vast majority of Irish people stand on the question of neutrality. So the government at the moment pushing to dismantle the triple lock. They claim it's about efficiency and about sovereignty, but in reality we all know that's a lie. In reality it's about lining Ireland ever closer to NATO and to Europe as it militarises, and moving closer to the side of the warmongers and genocide enablers. As Paul Murphy has shown in the last couple of weeks with parliamentary questions, actually with the legislation that's proposed would allow, if it existed in 2003, for Ireland to join a mission like the invasion of Iraq. That's the future that we're looking towards, a very scary prospect, and I think that we're going to have to see a massive civil society campaign across the country if we're going to stop that march towards partiality. Neutrality, I think, has to be said, it's not passive, it's never passive. We're going to hear a little bit today about the history of where Irish neutrality's come from. It's always been about putting ourselves on the side of the oppressed and in opposition to the oppressors and to imperial powers around the world, whether that's in Gaza, in Yemen or the Congo or anywhere else. So I'm going to end my comments there. I would just plug once that we'll have a gathering of the Irish Neutrality League, something that's founded over 100 years ago by James Connolly and others, on the 14th of June. So we're calling people out all across Ireland to join on the 14th of June from 2 p.m. So kind of in order today, we're going to hear from Jess, who's a counsellor for People Before Profit. We're going to hear from Liam Cunningham, who's fresh off the Madeleine Freedom Flotilla. We're going to hear from Adrienne Wallace on the links to Palestine and Ukraine. And finally, we'll hear from Paul Murphy. So I guess without further ado, I'll hand over to Councillor Jess Spear for People Before Profit.
Thanks everybody for coming today. So Irish neutrality at its root comes from our anti-colonial history. From the First World War, where you had James Connolly building a broad front to oppose Irish support for Britain's war effort and helping to set up the Irish Neutrality League to oppose conscription, to the Second World War, where De Valera and the Fianna Fáil government announced the policy of neutrality. The concept of neutrality and its underlying anti-colonial legacy is immensely popular, and this is why most people instinctively sympathise with the struggle of the Palestinians. I think Irish neutrality is just common sense amongst Irish working class communities. Like, you don't have to convince your neighbours that US foreign policy is shaped by an imperialist agenda and that we should have no part in assisting it. However, it's very clear that the modern Irish elite obviously find the policy of neutrality deeply embarrassing. And over the last 2 decades, they've sought to undermine it wherever possible. The most egregious example is the US military's use of Shannon Airport. Even though under the Air Navigation Foreign Military Aircraft Act of 1952, no troops of a foreign country are allowed to enter Ireland while wearing their uniforms, about 1 in 4 US troops who served in Iraq passed through Shannon. And it was also used for torture renditions, which was subsequently allowed by the Irish government and never investigated shamefully. Aircraft who are carrying weapons are supposed to seek permission first, but the Irish government has refused to carry out spot checks. We should also remember that Irish troops were sent to Afghanistan while it was under US occupation, and in 2017, Fine Gael pushed through Ireland's membership of PESCO, which not only committed us to increased military spending, even though we desperately need money for housing and public services, it also cooperates with NATO. As an American who now calls Ireland my home, it's clear as day to me that our neutrality is under threat, and if we don't stop them, the political establishment will slow march us into US wars with all the death, destruction and devastation that goes with it.
Thank you, Jess. We're going to go to Liam Cunningham next, who probably needs no introduction. He's just off the Freedom Flotilla and he's going to share his thoughts on the pamphlet and campaign.
It's kind of ironic that the greatest argument for neutrality is what's going on now, a genocide. The reason our neutrality, in my opinion, is incredibly important is because the people that this government is trying to align ourselves with are actively arming and are actively involved in this genocide. There is no better argument for our neutrality at the minute. There is obviously a moral and ethical argument for neutrality, but what we're seeing daily in 4K on our television screens should copper fast our neutrality. It's the only way that Ireland, and we have great respect around the world because we haven't ever had an empire, because we're not militarily involved in any war, and it gives us bragging rights because we do not have a shady past as our neighbours do and our neighbours across the other side of the Atlantic. Our neutrality is not only necessary, it's utterly precious and hugely important that we hold on to it and fight tooth and nail for it. We need to disassociate ourselves with people who are not respecting international law, as we can see. This flotilla that I've just been assisting in launching are doing the work of governments around the world who are shirking their responsibilities that they have. The Geneva Convention says that the site of a genocide, it is beholden to signatories to the Geneva Conventions to intervene. If we were doing our job properly, there should be an Irish naval vessel carrying this humanitarian aid, because that is our duty, not only morally, but also under international law. And this dilution, attempting to get rid of the triple lock, it plays straight into the hands of the warmongers, and we have to protect it. It's some bizarre cognitive dissonance at the moment that I just cannot understand. And as these fine people said, these are arms companies, and the well-worn 70s phrase, the military-industrial complex, are trying to make profits at the expense of Ireland's reputation on the international stage. It should be fought tooth and nail that we hold on to the triple lock. And if that argument continues, then let the government explain to the people why they want to get rid of it and put it to the people. We all know what the result will be. It would be laughed out of this country that they even attempted to dilute the triple lock. That's it.
Thank you, Liam. And we're going to move next to Councillor Adrienne Wallace, who's a councillor for People Before Profit in Carlow and a member of the Irish Neutrality League as well.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks. Look, the way I see it is that if war ever brought us lasting peace, surely we would have had it by now. And in fact, much of recorded history has been filled with imperial or colonial occupations. And I think it's fair to say that continuing on that trajectory is going to lead us to more violence, more war and more debt. And that's a path that we're all too familiar with here in Ireland. In most villages or towns across the country, there are monuments that reflect the very real scars of the victims of violence in this country. And look, I want to focus on, in particular, the government's response to Ukraine and Palestine, because I think it perfectly encapsulates their hypocrisy and it reveals their agenda, which is at odds with the anti-colonial sentiment that the people in Ireland hold. So in response to Putin's bloody invasion of Ukraine, the Irish government have attended 25 meetings of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group. It is also contributing to the EU military assistance mission. They also agreed to send more than 120 million in non-lethal military aid. Now, I don't really know how you can have non-lethal military aid, but there we go. And despite earlier promises that the Irish troops would only train Ukrainians in demining, it emerged that they were actually providing weapons. Now, by the time this press conference is over, Israel will have killed another child. A child in Gaza is killed every 45 minutes. And since October 7th, Israel has killed at least 17,400 children, 1,700 of whom were under the age of 1. They were killed before they could even take their first steps on this earth. And in fact, more women and children have been killed in Gaza by the Israeli military over the past year than in the same period of any other conflict in the past 2 decades. They have bombed hospitals, they have killed aid workers, they have blocked aid entering for civilians, and most recently, they have killed civilians who are trying to reach that aid. The ICC and the UN have stated that Israel is committing war crimes. The Taoiseach himself has acknowledged that this is a genocide. And in light of the full weight of that knowledge, he still chose to water down the OTB and voted against blocking the sale of Israeli war bonds. Now, what sort of leadership is that? And I think the reality is that the people in Ireland have shown more leadership. The 3 women who were recently arrested for protesting at Shannon Airport, those who occupied the central bank, those who marched on Barclays Bank in the north most recently, and the tens and tens of thousands of us who take to the streets every month. While this government is all talk and no action when it comes to Palestine, and that is in complete contrast to its response to the Ukrainian invasion. And what this pamphlet tries to address is why, and to answer that big question. And I think it's very fair to say that because to do so would put them at odds with US, EU and Western imperialism. Their complicity reveals where their interests lie, and that's in buddying up to a system that is completely at odds with Irish history. But it also reveals a strategy to paint European militarism as somehow better, more democratic, more social than that of the US or Russia or China. But the reality is that while Trump puts migrants in cages, the EU has let them drown in the Mediterranean. And if, as a country, as a politician, you need to be complicit in genocide in order for the system to work, then maybe this system shouldn't work. We are potentially on the brink of large-scale wars. We are most definitely on the brink of climate catastrophe. When do we say enough is enough and genuinely go about creating a vision of Ireland that seemed to die with James Connolly? I've been involved in politics a long time, and in that time I have seen different governments come and go with little change or little effect. But I've also witnessed movements from the belly up in Irish society that have transformed this place, from repeal, the anti-war charges campaign and the same-sex referendum. And when it seemed that the sun would never set in the dark days of British colonialism, we were once a beacon of hope for a oppressed country. And maybe it's time for that again. So I thank you all for being here today, and I really would encourage people to get out and buy that and give it a read. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Adrienne. And to wrap up this part of the press conference, we're going to go to Paul Murphy, TD, who was one of the authors of the document.
Thanks a lot, Conor. We're in a world that is marked by huge increases in military expenditure. Military expenditure has gone up every single year over the past decade and is now at an increasing, like a rapid trajectory of rising even further. In the EU, we have the so-called Rearm Europe plan. Of course, Europe was never disarmed, and yet more and more money is going to be given to the military-industrial complex. And a world that is divided into rival imperialist camps who are in competition with each other, who are spending more and more on the military, and who threaten the entire world with the prospect of war. That's the international context for an assault by the Irish political establishment on what is left of Irish neutrality. That's the context. The reason they want to erode neutrality now is to be able to ally openly and clearly with one of those camps, the camp led by US imperialism, the camp that is funding and arming and supporting the genocide in Gaza. For the political establishment, neutrality has been an embarrassment for a long time. I mean, you can go back 20 years, over 20 years now, to the Fine Gael policy document Beyond Neutrality, which described the triple lock as a political straitjacket that they'd like to be rid of. But they weren't able to move. At that stage, Micheál Martin described the triple lock as at the core of our neutrality, and Fianna Fáil defended the triple lock. They saw their opportunity with Putin's illegal criminal invasion of Ukraine to now go after neutrality in a full-fronted way. So Micheál Martin, who will now say that neutrality is not in question, no one is ever talking about neutrality, then said that neutrality is a policy matter that can change at any time. Leo Varadkar said a similar thing, Simon Coveney said a similar thing. So their first attempt was to try to undermine the very concept of neutrality. They were pushed back by public opinion, which remains steadfastly in favour of neutrality, no matter how many opinion pieces there were telling people to grow up and get over it and have a mature debate, which really means get rid of neutrality. And so then they changed tack. which is to say we'll just get rid of the triple lock and we'll redefine neutrality to mean only we won't actually join NATO. We'll do everything up to the point of joining NATO. We can participate in NATO-led wars, we can participate in NATO-led invasions, but we won't actually join NATO, and we just say that's all that neutrality actually means, as opposed to it means not aligning with any of the big military powers. It means being a consistent voice against imperialism, against oppression, no matter where it happens in the world, no matter who is responsible for it. So now Micheál Martin, who told us that the triple lock is at the core of our neutrality, now says to us the triple lock has nothing to do with neutrality whatsoever. So we're involved in an almighty fight to defend neutrality. We don't think it's a lost fight. We don't think it's guaranteed that the government will get through their legislation to get rid of the triple lock. We know that public opinion is massively on our side, but the challenge we have is to mobilise that public opinion onto the streets in a big way in order to push the government back. So we're part of broad coalitions like the Irish Neutrality League in the tradition of James Connolly, Together for Neutrality, and are working with others to put as many people on the streets as possible on Saturday the 14th of June, 2 o'clock at the Garden of Remembrance. But part of that battle is to kind of arm people with the arguments, arm people with the understanding of the history, of where this has come from, why they're doing it, and that's the role of this pamphlet, is to give people the arguments to then go and talk to others about why it's so important to defend the triple lock and to defend neutrality. And I just finish on this, that, I mean, the government published the heads of bill of getting rid of the triple lock just a couple of weeks ago, and it confirms everything that we said. So they have spoken about, Fianna Fáil manifesto speaks about reform of the triple lock, the government has spoken about reform of the triple lock, but the heads of bill is very, very clear. This is the end of the triple lock. This is the deletion of the triple lock. And in fact, the senior civil servant who was at the Oireachtas Committee, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Defence last week, agreed that you can refer to it accurately as the removal of the triple lock. The legislation is clear in terms of it clears the way for up to 50 troops to be sent abroad with no lock whatsoever, no need of a vote for the Parliament. And then in terms of the sending of more than 50 troops abroad, it's extremely, extremely broad, the conditions. So you need a vote of the government, a vote of the Dáil, and it just has to be on a international force. It can be a regional body. It doesn't have to be the UN. It doesn't have to be a UN peacekeeping mission. It doesn't have to be even for peacekeeping. It can be for international security missions. And again, the head civil servant at the Oireachtas Committee last week agreed that if this passes, any future government, if they have a majority in the Dáil, which they likely will have, will be able to send Irish troops abroad on missions organised by coalitions of the willing, on missions organised by NATO, and agreed that if they had a majority in the Dáil, they could have sent Irish troops abroad to participate in the invasion of Iraq. The only test is that they say it's within the principles of the UN Charter. But who determines whether it's in the principles of the UN Charter is the government. This is the government that is going to make the case that we want to send these troops abroad. This is a party in terms of Fianna Fáil that allowed the US troops to use Shannon Airport to participate in the invasion of Iraq, but couldn't send troops abroad. And so, you know, there were some politicians from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael at the committee last week who said, this is about trusting future governments to send troops abroad wherever they want. Well, I don't trust Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to send troops abroad wherever they want. I think the majority of people in this country don't. I precisely want to tie their hands. I want to have a political straitjacket. I want to know in future that they will not be able to send troops abroad unless they are genuine peacekeeping missions. And that's what the triple lock guarantees, and that's what the government is trying to get rid of.
Thank you, Paul. So we have some time for questions to any of our panel members. I'll take them in the order they come.
Liam, can I just ask, first of all, a lot of people think you're on a flotilla to Gaza. Can you perhaps explain your participation in that and why you're back in Dublin? Because I think a lot of people think you're actually on the boat.
Well, the people who think I'm on the boat haven't been looking hard enough at the pages. I've not only on my social media channels introduced every one of them by name that are on the boat, but they refuse because it's a much more heart-rending story if I'm on it. The boat they have after the previous one, larger boat, was bombed, was droned twice from the air in the middle of the night. This one is very small. It's a 4-man crew and 8 volunteers, so 12 of them altogether. It is loaded with the stuff that the Tel Aviv regime will not allow into Gaza. So it's got crutches, it's got antibiotics, baby formula, it's even got a 3D printed prosthetic baby's arm. All of it is humanitarian. I've met them all. I've shared bread with them over the last few days. They're remarkable people. They are doing the job that we are supposed to be doing. The people who are supposed to respect international law. And as I said earlier on, there should be a flotilla of Irish naval vessels standing up for international law and treating international law with the respect it deserves. Not this wonderful disparate group of people who have got together to put their lives in danger because they're not being backed up. There should be a European force circling that boat to ensure that they get there, because that is their legal responsibility, not from whatever side of the political spectrum you're on. If without this, as I said, every tin pot authoritarian jumped up dictator is going to look at the situation here and go, we can do this, lads. They don't do anything about it. And I have to say, as members of the press call me old-fashioned romantic, as the fourth estate, you guys are a pillar of democracy. It's your job to protect it, not just and the present company accepted. You guys are here. These are the guys that the overwatchers of the breaches in international law and in democracy, and it's a oversimplification, but if you've got somebody saying it's raining and somebody saying it isn't, your job is to look out the window and see what's happening. This is how dystopian we are at the minute. Putting these, and as Michael Martin said, this is he regards it, and therefore the Irish government regarded it as genocide. If this was World War II and we just discovered about Auschwitz, it is not the onus of the media to go to Heinrich Himmler and find out his side of the story. And that is what's happening now. Every time an Israeli spokesperson or politician is put in front of a camera, it's condoning this behaviour because you're giving them airtime. This absolutely has to stop. It's appalling. You saw Matt Miller admitting that he knew it was war crimes. And he actually used the phrase, I'm paraphrasing, I was following orders. He didn't agree with what he was saying. This was not a defence in World War II, and it's not going to be a defence in the future. But we have to see it for what it is. We're not looking back on this. This is happening in front of us and needs to be called out. Otherwise, every day is undermining international law. This is not, I was on with Colin went on talking about the flotilla. And at the end of it, he signed off by saying, but as we know, Liam Cunningham endorsed people before profit in the last. What has that got to do with what I said? Basically, what he was doing was qualifying to his listeners that it's okay, folks, he's a lefty. That's what that little sign off was just enough to create just a little bit of obfuscation in people's minds. And this subtlety is, I find it nausea-inducing. It's absolutely dreadful. It had nothing to do with what I was talking about. I was in international, talking to a load of international people, but yet they felt the need to put that little thing in at the end. And that's, for me, that's an embarrassment.
Can I just ask as well, to yourself and to Paul, obviously the government has said that the removal of the third arm of the lock, I guess, the UN approval, that would prevent, if Russia vetoed, if that would prevent Irish peacekeepers being sent to Ukraine for peacekeeping missions in the event of a ceasefire. That is predominantly their main concern, is that Russian veto. Would you support Irish peacekeepers going to Ukraine for peacekeeping missions if there was a veto from Russia?
Well, of course, as Paul has said in the Dáil, I've watched them. Well, the government were lying that we needed, that the Russians can stop us going, that any member of the Security Council can stop it. They can't. It's true to say that a General Assembly vote, which does not include the Security Council, we can manoeuvre our troops on a peacekeeping mission. So this, again, obfuscation about what our rights as a military force can do on behalf of the United Nations is not affected by, which is one of the reasons they were saying to get rid of the triple lock, because we can't do peace. And that's rubbish. This is how much they're scraping the barrel, that they're lying to people to try and assist them in getting rid of it. It's an appalling... the irony of, at this moment in time, to want to get rid of our neutrality when it has never been more important is beyond my comprehension.
Thank you.
Just
Do you want to
yeah.
Give me the microphone for
Sorry.
2 seconds. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I agree with Liam's quoting of my speeches in the dog. I appreciate someone watches them. Thanks. This is part of what the pamphlet does, is to try and deconstruct this government's logic around, their line is triple lock equals Russian veto, equals Chinese veto, equals Security Council veto. Like, that is not true. They changed the law in 2006. They had a debate around it. You should read the transcript, whereby they said up till now they've had the veto. We're going to change the law in order that the General Assembly suffices to meet the triple lock. And again, in the committee last week, the civil servant didn't really have an answer for that. Her argument was that the General Assembly decisions are not legally binding. That's correct in terms of the UN, but it meets, in terms of Irish legislation and our triple lock, it meets our requirement for unlocking our triple lock. So if UN General Assembly was to pass a resolution endorsing, supporting or otherwise sanctioning, that's from the legislation, any peacekeeping mission, that meets the requirements of the triple lock. The only other thing I'd add in terms of Ukraine is people should think this through about the question of sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine against a veto of Russia. What does it mean for Russia to be exercising a veto against peacekeeping troops going to Ukraine? It means they're not peacekeeping troops. It means that there is not peace, there is not ceasefire. It means they're talking about sending troops on the ground to prosecute a war against Russia. So, it clearly makes sense in the context of not because of the UN Security Council, but if you're going to have a peacekeeping mission, that should be based on there being actual peace, a ceasefire agreement, and on that basis, the UN, a UN peacekeeping force going in.
Thank you. Apologies to people with microphones, but a question for Liam.
Get in there early.
Wondering, what do you make of the government claiming that Sinn Féin's war bonds bill wouldn't have made any difference? And in general, are you ashamed of how the Irish government has acted in relation to that?
Well, you saw in practical terms exactly what happened when the government shot down the bill. The following day, the Israelis opened fire on Irish troops. I think that answers the question. The very least we can do is stop doing business with them. And I was asked that in an interview. I'm not worried about the socio-economic health of Ireland. So we're comparing that to the dismemberment of children. We're putting a spreadsheet ahead of our international responsibilities. We're putting, the health of our economy ahead of a genocide. Really? Is that where we are? Is that where our humanity is? Let's have a look at the checkbook before we help the children. I have no time for that. And anybody that does has lost their humanity. It's extraordinary. I remember Richard Boyd Barrett told me the first day when he went into the Dáil, one of the veteran politicians came over to him and said, "Don't forget, Richard, leave your conscience at the door." Is this where we are? Is this what we want our public representatives to leave their conscience at the door? We pay for them. The vast majority of people are disgusted with what's going on, disgusted with our neutrality being diluted, and the people in power think that we entrusted with the health of our democracy are siding with warmongers. That's why I'm here. I do not want to see this country that I adore been sold down to Swanee, so the boys across the road here can have their jobs with whatever commission or whatever when they're finally extricated from government. It's a boys' club.
And can I bring you back to the flotilla? You mentioned that in your ideal circumstances, the Irish Navy would be giving it a flotilla of its own or surrounding it.
Correct.
So what do you make of the detachment or the clash between the Irish government's rhetoric on what's going on in Gaza and the relative inaction, like, for example, not taking support for the flotilla?
It's appalling. I know it's the stalling tactics and the tide is turning. I mean, you guys look into this a lot more than I do. We weren't using the word genocide a little while ago. We weren't using the word sanctions. People are getting incredibly passionate. We have to be seen to do everything we can. We've also got the advantage of being a small country who is not aligned militarily, the neutrality, with anybody. It gives us a right because there's no military overlords telling us, no, you're in the club now. Any military club that we join, we're just going to be sidelined. We're too small to make a difference. What are we going to do? Tip our hat and say, lads, well, they're going to listen to us? We need to stand aside and be objective about this. And we need to do a huge amount more. I mean, if the Occupied Territory Bill come in and services are not on it, then forget about it. It's a waste of time. It's tinsel. There needs to be, and we need to start the ball rolling. If we do it, other countries will follow. Everybody's afraid to take the first step, and we need to have the balls to do it.
Any other questions?
Can I ask, Liam, obviously you mentioned the attacks before on the flotilla. Could you give us an example? Have there been any kind of intimidation, any threats?
Well, non-specific. There was last night. There was a scare, which, as the gentleman pointed out, we are turned out to be an Israeli drone, but not from Israel. Apparently, it was the Greek Coast Guard using the drones to keep their eye on migrants and push them back. So it was I think it was Greek Coast Guard, but how do you know that? It was spotted and identified as an Israeli manufactured drone. But they've gone before. They had every reason to be incredibly scared, and this is a much smaller vessel. There's been a few bits and pieces. There was an Israeli uniformed soldier saying that they're not going to say what their process is going to be, but they have one in place. So the subtle psychological undermining has already begun.
Anyone else? Okay, well, I think that's us for today. If people want them on the way out, we have copies of the pamphlet that are available for just down the back there, and we've also got a copy of our press release, a hard one as well. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.